All right. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to another US Chess School. In each of these episodes that I do, I try to do something that I wish somebody had told me when I was your age. And I was able to participate in a couple camps back in the day. They weren't run by Greg Shahada. He was just a little tiny baby, maybe not even existing when I did those camps. But, still, they are warm in my heart. And I always try, again, to show something that I didn't understand when I was a kid. So what we're going to talk about today is the theme is going to be when a knight dominates a bishop. And I'm going to do a little bit of yada yada for a second, but I'm just going to throw a question out there. Okay. And the question is, does anyone recognize this position in front of me today? I'd be impressed, but I think someone might get it. Does anyone recognize this position? Okay. So, oh man, we got somebody. Andy Woodward got it, dude. Amazing.
Oh, if you've been looking at chat, 5 people have already talked about it. It's the back.
Wow, man, that's very impressive. You guys might have been following more than one game today. I just followed one game. I wanted to see what happens when a guy kind of like on my level faces Magnus, and that was this guy Martinovich, and I just wanted to see it. And Martinovich played a great game, dude, great game, and then Magnus worked him in this position. Now, let me just say the position is still equal. We're going to look at a bunch of different positions that kind of have a lot to do with something like this. The position is still, there's no way Black should lose this game. If you're playing Magnus, though, the guy's going to go around and around on you. It's really going to be rough. I actually left around here because I was like, the guy's going to hold it. There's just no way he could lose it, but he did lose it. And one of the basic features of the positions that I want you guys to see today is generally when we talk about bishops, we'll say something like bishops like open positions, and that's mostly true. But a key thing I want you to just observe is that in this position, the bishop on d6 is dying because the pawn is on e5. It is blocking the bishop's path. Now, that doesn't mean Black is lost here. Black is not lost here. But the pawn on e5 is what is giving White chances. And honestly, maybe Black should even think about giving the pawn up. Could have given up the pawn earlier, too. That would have been a draw as well. So it's kind of like the pawn is more of a poison than it is a help for Black at this moment. Okay. I did an earlier lecture that I called Capablanca's rule. And this very much applies to the kinds of positions we're going to look at. In fact, you could say that we're going to look at a subset of positions that are mostly Capablanca's rule. Namely, you want your pawns on the opposite color of the bishop, right? I think we did a like informal poll, and we had a position with a pawn on the same color of the bishop and the opposite color of the bishop. And there were a horrendous amount of you out there who thought that it would be better to have the pawn on the same color of the bishop. And that is a very understandable intuition, because the first intuition is to say, hey, I want my bishop to control all those pawns, to protect them. But the problem with that thinking is your bishop is in fact just limited in scope, like the bishop here is on d6. I could talk forever about this endgame, but I just want to leave it with the thought that when me and Greg were kids, this position with GMs, they would have agreed a draw. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that claim that back in the day, this would just be a draw, and Magnus has changed the game because now it's not a draw. It's not a draw anymore, my friends. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to talk about some concrete examples. I just wanted to throw this one out, this position out. And we're going to start with a puzzle that I think is kind of instructive. So this position is White to move and win. If you have the answer, you could either, it's probably best to just come on and I'll call on you and you can tell us the answer. Otherwise, if you're shy, you can type it out. All right. And this is, while you're thinking on it, I guess what I'd like to say about the study is that obviously we're talking again about Capablanca's rule, and the bishop on h7 is dying because of the pawn on f5. Okay. Now, in general, we used to have this thing. I don't know if the other presenters do this, but there's a culture where you put an exclam at the end if you want to get called on. We got a lot of people getting putting exclams on their moves, so I don't know if that's quite the same thing. Let's have Rio come on. If he doesn't want to come on, that's fine. We'll just see here. So.
Yeah, I want to come on, yeah.
Okay, go ahead and tell us, and I'll make the moves. You tell me, and I make the moves.
H6.
King H6, good. Seems to force King H8.
No, Knight H4.
Okay, King G8.
Knight F3.
Good. King H8.
Knight E5. Not play Bishop G because I'm checkmating. Knight D7.
Knight D7 or C6, sorry.
Yeah, C6 also works.
D7?
Yeah, my idea was D7 and then
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. King H8.
Knight F8, Knight F8.
Very nice. Very good. Okay, so a beautiful study and highlighting the way in which a knight can dominate a bishop. And I'm going to show another one. Anybody can get a chance to get called on here if they solve it. This is white to move and win. And one of the things that I want these studies to do is to train your intuition to say, right, it's not just the open position where the bishop is better. No, it has everything to do with a pawn blocking the bishop's path, like here and in the first one, where we have to be wary of the bishop being poor. All right, let's see. I think we got exclams. I'm going to call on Sefer. If he doesn't want to be called on, that's okay.
No, I'm good with being called on.
Okay. Go ahead, Sefer.
Yeah, thank you. So I think King G6 is the right move, and after King B7, then my idea is Knight to D8 check.
Very
King
good.
B7, Knight to F7, or that Knight C7, and then the bishop is dead.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, double exclam means call on me, Greg says. Okay, good. So one of the ways I think that's interesting to talk about the particular kinds of endings that we're going to talk about today is to say, in the same way, for example, let's say you're down a pawn in a rook ending. Almost all the time when you're down a pawn in a rook ending, the back of your mind should be saying, oh, Philidor position. That's where I'm headed. That, you know, that's going to be like my goal. The shining light at the end of the tunnel is going to be the Philidor position. And in a lot of ways, these studies that I'm showing here at the beginning might be kind of like that, a shining light at the end of the tunnel, just kind of like what it might look like, and also what you would have to fear. So I'm going to show a couple examples, some of them from my own recent games. And so I was white in this position, I don't know, a month and a half ago, I guess. And my opponent, I feel I have not played particularly well. And my opponent here, I think, should play Knight E4. And it's a very violent position, and I'm not sure what's going on. And instead, he played Knight E6. And so one of the things that's interesting, very interesting to me about this position is just how quickly this position kind of goes bad for Black in a way that it surprised me. Okay, so I took the knight. Bishop takes, Knight E5, Knight E4, Bishop takes, DE. We could probably spend some time talking about FE2, but let's just focus on DE. And I played A3. And I'm going to blah blah a little bit, but in that time, I want you to consider two questions. How bad is it for Black? Maybe you decide it isn't bad for Black at all. And what should white do? Right? So 2 questions, and I can call on you, but I am going to blah, blah just a little bit. Why? So give you some time to think about it, okay? So one of the things that's happened, let's say in my lifetime, but also a little bit before, is the evolution of thinking on the bishop. So you got to imagine that for a good, let's say, 100 years, at least 100 years, there were very smart people, very talented players who felt that the knight was essentially equal to the bishop. And they might have said things like, well, there's definitely situations where the knight is better than the bishop and there's bishops better than the knight. But all in all, basically equal. And in the old books, the old books always start, they don't really start anymore like this so much, but back in the day, every book would start with a valuation of the pieces. Rook is worth 5, bishop worth 3, knight worth 3. So it was like, there was consensus that the knight was better than the bishop. Then kind of Fisher came along, and honestly, even the generations around him didn't get it. Like, he kind of understood that the bishop was stronger, was the first. But even later, there's a lot of players who still kind of didn't feel the pull of the bishop. And now with your generation, the computer loves the bishop, man. Computer just loves the bishop. So now too, I'm infected by the prejudice of the bishop as well. And so one of the reasons I feel like I was misguided in this position, right? Because when I got here, I wasn't entirely sure what to think, but that I was misguided in this position was precisely that love of the bishop philia, if I'm allowed to call it that, the bishop philia. And it's tricky because this bishop is, in a lot of ways, controls a lot of squares. Let's light it up, in fact. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's one of the interesting things about the position. So the bishop already controls more squares than my knight will ever control. It's kind of surprising. Okay, so if you would like me to call on you, put a double exclam, and in addition to saying, well, your rough evaluation, also what you think white should do. Kind of interesting question. What should white do? All right, let's call on Rio here.
Okay, so I feel like the position is slightly better, at least.
Mm-hmm.
As like the bishop, the only really good score is like d5, but what does it do there? Nothing. It doesn't really do much there. And what I want to do is to play b4 at some point, and later on go rook c5, b6 will create weaknesses, and then I can at some point go a4 and b5, and leave him with either a b7 isolated pawn or like a c6 isolated pawn. We probably don't, or we can go with g4 at some point. But I mean, we don't need to rush. It doesn't matter.
Okay, good. And by the way, I when I was doing my famous blah blah, I did a little slip. I needed to put black's move in first, but the good news is it doesn't change the position that much. Black played bishop d5. Maybe he shouldn't have, but in any case, this is the position. What should white do? Anybody else like to give their 2 cents on what we think black should do here? Or excuse me, white should do. What should white do? And the evaluation. Rio says at least a little bit better for white. Yeah. Very peculiar, like the bishop does control more squares than the knight. More squares than that knight will ever control. Knight maximally gets 8. Yeah. Now, Sepper, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but we're asking what we should do about white.
I just thought like as counterplay for black.
Yeah, that's totally appropriate to be asking that too. And so let me just mention in the chat what Sepper's saying is B6 and C5 is definitely a thought for black. And one of the questions that white needs to contend with, honestly, is how concerned should we be about B6 and C5? Or you could say rook C8 and C5, or maybe A5 to stop B4 and then rook C8, C5. All of that is something that white needs to wonder about. Yeah. Okay. And let me frame the question, by the way, of two. Let me put in just two plans. Okay. B4 is interesting, what Rio said, but let me frame it as two plans. Let's say white has only two choices. One is to go for it with G4. The other is to play Queen D2. Which one of those should white play? With Queen D2, we're going to aim for like Queen A5 and try to probe the dark squares on the queen side. With G4, we're obviously trying to loosen up the black king. Yeah. Rio's asking, why should you play G4? Good question. Good question. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't. Uh-huh. Well, okay. So one of the main reasons I wanted to show this position is I did play G4 in the game, and I think this is maybe technically correct, but on a practical level, I was disappointed with it in the sense that why was I motivated to play G4? Well, it was because I was motivated by what Sepper was saying with B6, C5. I was thinking to myself, oh, geez, I'm so afraid of the bishop over there that if he opens a position, I feel like I'm just going to die. And the interesting thing in hindsight, when I was looking at it, I review all my games. I try to review all my games in some depth, was that it's very difficult for him, to achieve B6 and C5. And not only that, but then when he does it, he's going to open lines on the queen side that ultimately kind of might lead to his king. And that's a key thing to understand about G4 is that white has the better minor piece here, and he definitely has the advantage for that reason, but he has a second advantage, and that is the better king. And G4, I think, ultimately was not a bad move, though it was very risky because it's much harder to evaluate because it induces complications. But in general, the attack is going to favor me on the king side because my knight can control two squares and because it's very difficult for the bishop to help in the defense of the king. So I'm just going to roll through this game, show you what happens. Thought it was kind of instructive, and then I will show the next example. He took. This was the only variation that kind of scared me. And we did this little dance. Check to the miserable king. Rook F1. Snip, snap. Queen F8. King G2. Notice the knight's a beast, also on the defense. It's obviously a massive thing that I'm controlling a square like knight F3. A5 makes some sense. Queen F4. And the horror of the position is that if he takes, he's lost because the knight is so awesome and my king's a little bit better. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. The knight gets to do a dance. And yeah, D5, toast, all the way gone. Snippos. Okay, game over. Let's go to the next example. Okay, so I'm going to flip it. I was black in this position also at this recent tournament. And Yeah, it's black to move. Think for a moment about what he should do and what's going on. And when I got here, I was very happy with I shouldn't say very happy. Let's say I was comfortable with my position. But when I got here, I became frightened. I became frightened about the following variation. Boom, which was my intention. Boom, boom. And now if I take rook takes c3, I was simply terrified of rightly so, of all kinds of things like bishop h6. And that fear led me to, at this point, play bishop g5. And this is a mistake. And if somebody could put in words, okay, why this is a mistake, I think it would be kind of cool. It's not going to be, try to put in words why this move, bishop g5, is a mistake. Good. Rio says, trading the dark squares and making knight d4 a monster. So one of the things to notice about bad bishops, so what's my bad bishop going to be? It's going to be my bishop on b7, is that if you got a second bishop, it's really not nearly so bad. And the bishop on b7 certainly has, at least in this position, a role because he's like a helicopter parent to the knight on e4, right? Like it's making sure that that point is secure. And so I could have done a variety of moves here that I think would have been fine. I could have played here and then knight f5, bishop g5, for example. Or if I just want to play bishop g5 in this position, that's also okay, simply because I have the c3 pawn as compensation now. Okay, so let's take a look at how this game slid down here. My opponent's name is Zhu, Chinese GM, like 2650 or something like that. Here we go. So bishop g5, snip, rook c1, simple play, and all of a sudden I have some grief. Now, I want to stress that I hadn't realized, I hadn't quite processed that I had grief here, and I make an interesting mistake here in this position that has everything to do with what I'm calling bishop philia, the love of bishops, okay? So I played knight dc5. What did white play to punish this move, and why is it a mistake? This is definitely something to address with words. Why is knight dc5 a mistake? Rio has it, b4, exactly. And so a key feature of this position is to see that when I take this bishop, which is kind of hard at this point not to, maybe I could consider knight e6, but I'm definitely worse after knight e6. When I take that bishop, what I've done is I've left my bishop on b7 more lonely. And that is, when you've got a bad piece, the more the other minors you trade off, the worse, the more magnified the loser dome, the loser dome of bishop b7, your bad bishop will become. Second of all, the bishop on d3 doesn't fight for the dark squares. And the dark squares are critical here because they are the blockade squares. So anytime you're dealing with an isolated queen pawn, you really want to focus on the squares around the pawn. Let me show you a similar example. And partly I'm showing you this just because my own chess history, I feel like this is the thing that it should have been burned into my mind and not allowed me to play knight dc5. And that is namely, here is a standard position from the knight d2 French. I'll just show you how it comes about. This is kind of an old line. And then c3, castles, and bishop d3. It's a really elegant move with the point that, first of all, you never want to take on c6 because then black will have bc and he will be beautiful. But also, just first of all, a trick, so that if bishop g4, bishop h7, and that really it's going to be hard now for black to not do a move like bishop f5 or knight f5, in which case the light square bishop is going to trade itself off. And the point is, right, is like, oh, white is not interested really in that light square bishop. Give it away and fight for the dark squares, and you can claim that white is a little bit better. Okay, so this, guys, you really worked me from this point, so I'd like to just kind of roll through it and show you what happened. So knight d3, and here I probably should have played rook ac8 and had at least some fighting chances. I think I'm definitely still worse. I got a little frisky with a5. It seemed to make sense. Unfortunately for me, rook fd1, rook d8, kind of weird, but it's still a hard position. Queen b5, exclam. Queen f6, knight e4 de. Okay, and what I want you guys to see about this position is it's one of these paradigmatic positions that we're going to look at a couple examples, and the Carlsen example definitely comes to mind, right? The pawn on e4 is murdering my bishop. If the pawn were on e5, honestly, almost anywhere else, it would be so much better for my bishop on b7. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this position is the computer actually thinks that I'm not doing that bad. The computer, of course, is a bishop lover. Strategically, though, from a human perspective, I really do think I'm doing terrible. Okay, so my opponent, beautiful move, beautiful and simple, just rook a1. And now the computer wanted me to do like g6. But okay, I played here. I thought my bishop was getting active. And the next move that he does is very nice. It's going to show kind of like a strategic, let's say the strategic intent of how to play this kind of position. Check it out. Rook d7. And what he's really doing, it's a little bit, let's call it unexpected, because the rook is, on the 7th is trading itself off. And normally you don't do that. But what he's really trying to do is isolate the position to one where he's working against my bishop. And my bishop, he's going to kick off the d5 square. On the dark squares. On the dark squares. I was hoping I'd get some compensation. I don't got a lot. h4, nice move. Notice, h4 forces me onto the light squares. b5. Check to the rook. Check to the rook. Queen a5. And I'm totally lost. Notice that you can imagine some positions where the bishop on d3 would be like a proud person. But here it really isn't. It really, he's not some proud outpost going out there. No, he's a chump. He's all locked down. And my pawns on light squares in front of the king are also very much destroying my bishop. Okay, so now I'm going to show you another example. And I'm going to ask it from a I'm going to do it as a question. Okay. So this is black to move. Let's flip the board. What should black do? You can guess that this came from like in English. And kind of funny enough, this game, black was my opponent who beat me in the example I just showed, and white was this young man, Ilya Nizhnik, who's in St. Louis and is, I think, now busted up into the 2,700 range. Okay, so the question, what should black do in this position? What should black do? One other simple way is, we're going to take the pawn or we're not going to take the pawn. Evan says knight d4. One obvious question about knight d4, though, is what are you going to do after e3? We got somebody saying, if you're going to suffer, you might as well try to win the pawn on b4. Well, that's a thought. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Somebody says, I will take the pawn and take. A5 creating more weaknesses. So got somebody saying black's position already looks suspicious. Maybe. I mean, how about this? We could, really the question is to take or not to take, right? You could play knight e7, even knight d4. You could play bishop d7. All those positions are possible. Oh, we're working on the poll, Austin. We're working so hard. Only Greg Shahada has the power of the poll, though. And every week I come on here and I say, my friends, when do I get to do a poll? But every week I'm shot down. And this has been going on for a while. But the magical creatures of the internet have gathered in their wooden glen, and they are working on the poll for me. Okay. So let me show you this. And so it's interesting. The guy who beat me, I think, ultimately comes to a similar mistake to the one I did. And maybe it's even harder to foresee. So check this out. He takes, C takes b4, queen b3. All right, so you cannot play knight c6 because of bishop takes c6. All right, so you play a5, bishop a3, bishop b6, snip, snop. All right, and let's say the obvious. If we got knight for bishop, and if you do not play knight, if you do not play d5, you will be structurally worse. Okay, so he plays d5. This was clearly his intention. And now, by force, we get this position. And very interesting, I think a lot of people, I'm sure he came to this position too and said to himself, oh, you know, how bad can it be? How bad can it be? I got the bishop. I got the bishop filia. Well, this one's interesting. So the pawn on e5 is definitely a bummer for the bishop. And also a position where it's hard, it would be really hard to judge, because it feels like a lot of positions that when we talk about a bishop being better than knight, we say, oh, if the position's open, then the bishop's better than the knight. Well, this certainly feels like an open position. Also, if we say something like, oh, if there's pawns running on both sides, then it's better for the bishop. Well, it's kind of true here. You know, black's got that b pawn. But no, this is actually a very, very unpleasant position for black. And one of the things I find so interesting about the decision to take on b4 on move 12, and here we're already on move 20, is it felt very natural, at least to me, that we ended up in this position from that. So it was, a lot of times these positions with the bad bishop, when you get into them, just like I got into them against Zhu, as well as, you know, Zhu got into it with Nizhnik, is they're pretty hard to like evaluate from a distance. And I feel like, yeah, there's whole generations of players who are trained to believe that the bishop is great. And, you know, honestly, it usually is. There's even the saying, the worst the worst bishop is better than the best knight. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that feels like a true saying. Okay, so here we go. Check out how White plays this great. This game just amazing, kind of in the same technical way that Zhu got me. So, note to Bene. There's in this. Actually, let's go and say, in this position, in the first example, I think it's important to say that here Black has two weaknesses, and that's what's going to lead to, you know, a critical situation. It's not just the bishop, it's also the king. And then in this position, the critical thing is that Black's B pawn is a weakness in addition to the bishop being poor. But what's interesting, of course, is if you imagine, okay, the pawn on b7 goes away, is it necessarily lost just because you're down a pawn? Kind of like the Carlsen game, right? Where you come to this position over here and you say to yourself, really? Because if you give up the e5 pawn, well, it probably should be a draw. Now, this one I think is a draw. I don't know about the Nizhnik example, because the knight will still have a lot of things to say. So let's check out how this game went. It's very nice, very well played. Check to the queen, light squares, right? So we're just gonna, we own the light squares in the same way, actually, it's an obvious thing, but it's important to say out loud. In the same way as in when you have a bishops of opposite color middle game or ending, the point of the really important point you got to say out loud in those situations is whoever has the initiative will have a much bigger advantage than you normally get when you have an initiative, because if you have an initiative, it's going to be on the color of your bishop. If you have a light square bishop, say, and you are attacking on the light squares, you're up a piece on the light squares. Same thing is going on here. We're up a piece on the light squares. It's not as intense as a bishop because the knight has to go back and forth between the light and the dark, but we're the ones who get to talk to the light squares, and we're definitely talking to the light squares here. All right, let's check out how this game goes. Knight e4, very beautiful knight. Wow, one of the finest steeds that's ever walked. Queen d7, rook b5, light squares please. Rook b1. Knight c5, knight b7. Bummer. As in my game, I tried to do tactics to bail out. It's not going to work. Bummer. And then now we're just into a clearly lost ending. Yeah. Okay. So let me show you a final example, and this one hurt me a lot, and it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different, and I'm going to say a little bit more complicated because it does not involve Capablanca's rule. All right, so I was Black in this position against Julio Becerra, famous Cuban GM. And, you know, I don't normally even play this opening, but I knew exactly what was going to come because Julio always played the same opening. So I said to myself, oh, I'm going to get the bishop. I love the bishop, and I'm going to be just fine. Well, let me show you what happened. I knew exactly how this game was going to develop because he had had it in several other games. Very simple idea from black. I'm going to plant the knight on d4, and I'm going to fix my pawn structure. All right, so let's think about this position for a second. Let's first address why black could believe that he is totally fine. And by the way, maybe he is. I might even flip the switch on the old computer here to see what it says right now about this position. But let's first address in human terms why black could believe in this position. My pawn on d4, it's on a dark square, and I'm going to have a light square bishop. My pawn on c6 is going to move to c5, also a dark square. So that too, you'd think, okay, progress. But the weird thing about this position that so hard for me to get a sense for, even now, it's kind of mystical to me, is that it's very difficult it's going to be an example of a position where my bishop is going to be hitting air. And white will have an extra piece in front of my king. Right. And so I was still optimistic here, and I thought, I thought in general everything should be okay. Let's play a couple moves. Check to the knight, queen d7, a4, and then I kind of demand that he take my bishop. And he says, okay, I'll take your bishop, buddy. a5, c5. I said to myself, hey, buddy, I want to put my pawns on the dark squares. He plays queen f4, and I move back. So let's stop here for a second. Yeah, very interesting position. I'll tell you what. I have, like all my game analyses I do for myself, I'm not really looking too much at the computer. If someone wants to come on and say, Kraai, you're wrong. You're wrong, buddy. I love the bishop, and the bishop's fine. You might be right, and we'll turn on the computer. We'll see. If you wanted to say that, that's fine. We've got a question. Did I consider bishop takes e5? Yes, I did. But I felt like it was not enough. We just look briefly at that position. I think it was back here. No, not quite. Hold on. So it would be boom. Here, right? Here I can play bishop e5. I don't think this position is lost, but I definitely think I'm worse. In particular, I don't have any like clear play, and he can start doing things on the e file. Okay, so right, here's the basic question. What is the evaluation of this position? I.e., is this something black should have said to himself way long ago? Hey, buddy, this is not what you wanted. This is not what you wanted. You needed to do something else. Yeah. Seems like all the rules are in my favor. That I have the bishop should be fine. Should be fine. Does anyone want to make black's case? I'd be interested in hearing it. Interested in hearing about the bishops, the case for the bishop. I think the computer is going to say, honestly, I'm going to say the computer right here is going to say, I don't know, equal. You know, it all, you know, white is going to, notice, white is going to attack on the dark squares, right? I am down on the dark squares. So that is my problem. But we're going to see that Julio takes it up a notch as well. Basic question, where is the attack though? Okay. Black has a bad pawn structure? Really? Look at those. Look at them. Why are my pawns bad? I want to know. Somebody tell me. Why are my pawns bad? Oh, in the Resolimo. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn on the computer. Let's see what the B says. Yeah, it says equality. In fact, it likes black a little bit better. And what I want to tell you, my friends, is you don't want to be black in this position. This is a really interesting one. Yeah. So I'm going to fight. I'm going to actually fight with the computer on this one. And I had a feeling. And this is one of the things that it's really important to see when you're analyzing with the computer. The computer loves the bishops, man. It has no respect for the knight. And definitely here, this is a problem. All right, let me show you how Julio worked me here, because it was very impressive. Rook EB1. Very nice move. And what's the point? Well, he is going to try to create a weakness on the queen side before he moves on with h4. Was h4 first playable? I'm sure it was. I was going to say something very deep. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, one of the reasons why this is, from Black's perspective, hard to be too afraid of, is you say to yourself, wait a second, isn't he going to be opening the position if he plays for stuff like b4? Well, the answer is yes, but what does the bishop do over there that's so special? Let me do my dogmatic dance here for a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and if you want to be generous, give me 10, right? 10 squares, boss. That's a lot. Wait till we count it out when I get to d5. That's just more. That's just more. Unbelievable. This position continues to, yeah, I've looked at this several times. It continues to astound me. Here we go. I didn't know what to do. This is part of the problem. You saw this in the Magnus game too. The guy didn't know what to do. Rook a c8. All right, now we go snip, snip. h4. I go back. h5. Simple and strong. Bishop d5. Okay, I love my counting game, by the way. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, bro. 11 squares. Oh no. That knight's only got 6 squares, my friends. All right. But let's say the obvious. Attack on the dark squares. Check to the miserable king. King g8. Like in that first example, my king is worse. b4, simple and strong. You say to yourself, well, what has white done? Well, he's made a couple fragilities, if I'm allowed to call them that, over there. Queen g5, let's start working the dark squares, right? Check, check, it's not really a check. Rook a8. Well, Julio says, I'm going to keep a rook, please. Yeah, and if stuff like rook a2, then I think knight f5, and I'm already begging for life. And I think it was, only around here that I began to realize how dire it is. I'm sure if I look at it with the computer will probably find improvements for both sides, but you can see from the last couple moves that it's a very human way that the game has progressed here. King h8 is certainly an idea. Let's just say the obvious. There's a continual back rank problem here that I got. So I played king f8. And now white plays knight e2. I thought this was kind of clever. To kick either he has to trade the rook or go somewhere weird. Boom. Rook c1. queen b6, knight f4, bishop e6. And now let's say the obvious. My bishop on e6 is just a victim. It's just a victim to that knight. And it didn't have any great squares to go to. And Julio's now going to change the structure of the position, but one in which he's going to be, if not winning, better. And I don't want to go too deep into it because we're about to leave the land of bishop versus knight, but I just want to show you a lot of these games, of course, are decided in the build up to the position rather than just the position. So does that make sense? They're decided in the bishop, the build up happens with the bishop versus knight, or I should say the knight versus bishop. And then we get a conversion, a transformation of the advantage. So here we go, c3. And I say, okay. Now you look at this position, you say to yourself, oh, maybe it's not so bad. No, it's terrible. It's terrible. I traded it off. I thought maybe I'm going to live. And this position, I think it's gone. I think I'm all the way gone here. I'll play a couple more moves just so you guys can see it. Yeah, this is a goner. And I'm done. Okay, yeah, very instructive game. And so one of the reasons I wanted to show you this is the early examples. Okay, so our positions where we're talking about Capablanca's rule, right? The bishop is poor because it has got a pawn on the same color as itself, right? And that is truly the most common in the positions you really want to be the most wary of, I think. This is then a special case. Let's go back to the position where we started. This is a special case where the knight can be better than the bishop. And one way to articulate it, hopefully I've done it a little bit, is to say that in this position, white is able to attack on the dark squares and black is down a piece on the dark squares, right? And his beautiful light square control isn't doing all of that much. Okay, as a dessert, let's look a little bit more at this Carlsen game. And what I want to say is this guy played genius level to reach this position against Carlsen. And Carlsen had honestly bit off a little bit more than he could chew. And I thought he was, if anything, a little bit worse here. This is starting like the beginning of the end. It was one of these things where like every move that the guy made was technically equal, but then the problems just came and came and came. Notice the pawn is on a dark square. If it were on a light square, it would be much easier for a dude. If, for example, black could back this pawn up and put this guy here, then his position is mammoth if he could achieve that, but he cannot. Now, is he still fine? Yes. Should he play f5 here? Probably. Okay, so he's still totally equal. And even here, he's totally equal. But the knight is talking. He's just talking a little bit. Could black have played maybe more accurately? Maybe, but it's still totally equal. So notice the pawn on a5, it's just tickling. We're just tickling. We're not doing anything too extreme yet. Okay, so now we're going to get the transformation is going to be set in motion that will define the coming ending, namely rook e2, knight d4, rook e5. Snip, snop. Is black equal? Yes, but he's got a bad bishop. At any point, black could have played e4 to gambit the pawn, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that's a drawn ending. But we're prideful about our pawns. Is it still drawn here? Yes. Should black have taken on a5? I thought so. I thought the game could have gone like boom. What are we talking about here? Like, don't go to d6, Kraai. f6. Wait a second. It is more. It's more unpleasant than he wants it to be. It's true. Something like this. Boom, boom, and yeah, it's not so simple. But it is a draw. It's a draw. Okay. I can understand, though. You can understand why he didn't want it. And he said, oh, I'm just going to make it simple with bishop d6. Is it still a draw? Yes. And then right around here, dude goes for the big counterplay with bishop h6. And then he's officially in trouble after b5. We've got a question, why didn't black keep the rooks? He didn't have to play rook e2, rook e5, but it wasn't also like, it wasn't a losing move, you know? It was not a losing move. Whereas now, this bizarre thing where he is now officially in big trouble. And one of the things, let me just say the obvious, when you're playing Carlsen, you're playing some long game and your time's running, buddy. Your time's running. And boom, boom. A lot of the endgame studies are just like this, where the bishop has difficulty catching the pawn. Now, of course, the bishops are better, much better at catching a rook pawn than a knight. But this is obviously an example of a position where if you play BC, a6 is coming. So the poor guy had to do this. And now Carlsen is really going to work him to win this ending, but this one is not hard to believe that it's winning for white. It's not hard to believe. This is a full, you could study the zugzwangs in here for a while. Now, basically, we're zugzwanging until b4 happens, and then we go catch the b pawn with zugzwang. Then we're going to do it all over again. And here we're going to zug again. Baby, gone. Gone, baby, gone. Yeah, so really beautiful knight versus bishop ending. And my 2 cents is that that of course there are positions where the knight can be better than the bishop, and our computers will basically dissuade us. They will not be helpful in finding them. And some of the things you can see too in a lot of the examples is that if you turn on the computer will probably defend it fine, but you can see from a human point of view that it's much more difficult. For example, I was doing commentary on this game today, and we got to not this position, but this position. And I said to myself, it's equal, but white is more equal, right? It's clear that this is equal, but that white is the one with the chances. Yeah. Okay, my friends, thank you very much. And I'll be back, I think, later in the month, somewhere around the 30th or so. Actually, let's give a shout out to the date. I believe it is the 30th. So in 2 weeks, I'll come back again and I'll say my words of wisdom. Until then, bye-bye.